Welcome to the WealthStack podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Rosic, the director of WealthStack Content Solutions. And welcome to the first episode of 2025, folks. Still debating if I want to cancel my subscription to 2025. I've experienced the 14-day trial, and I'm not sure I'm interested yet. Just kidding. I wouldn't get to do things like have my friend Davis Janowski on to talk tech. And Davis needs little introduction, but he is the senior tech editor here at wealthmanagement.com. And in this episode, we'll be sharing our predictions and outlook for WealthTech for this year. So Davis, thanks for being brave enough to come back on. You're actually my first repeat customer.
Oh, wow. I am honored. I'm excited.
Generally, my first question to my guests is always about their background, but we've already done that. So instead, if someone were meeting you for the first time, what would they find surprising about your journey into the wealth tech space? Or maybe you could share a pivotal moment or trend in your career that shaped how you view the wealth tech industry today.
Most surprising, probably that I had no background in wealth tech or wealth management, financial services. Before I went to investment news many years ago, I had been a technology editor of PC Magazine, which the young in the audience will probably not even recognize. But back then, it was actually still a print magazine on the coffee table of many a house throughout the United States. We had a testing lab and all that sort of things. My mentor, a guy named Jim Pavia, he's now over at CNBC, and he's the senior editor over the personal finance and financial advisor coverage there at CNBC. He had the prescience to realize that there was this burgeoning map that Kitces gets all the credit for these days, but there were many maps like what Kitces has done before Kitces decided to start doing it, hired a team, and they update it regularly, and now it's almost the size of microfiche. Each dot would be a microfiche document to open up and see. But back then, it was just starting to grow, and I could basically reach out to just about every firm every month to see what was going on. But anyway, Jim Pavia had the presence of mind to think just having general interest reporting on tech, they need someone dedicated to it. So he hired me, recruited me away from PC Magazine, and I came and from that fire hose for several years, just learning the business and how advisors work and whatnot.
Shout out to Jim Pavia because I also worked with him at Investment News, and he is just absolutely iconic. And so we both had the pleasure of having him help shape our careers. And who knew my pivotal career moment would be when Gadget Girl launched and the purple fedora and trench coat became synonymous with wealth tech. So we've both found our way into this space, but let's give the people what they want, our 2025 wealth tech outlook. And so I want to dive into our first segment that I call Stats All, folks, to get the conversation going. So, according to the research Nestor, the wealth tech solutions market size is expected to reach 44 billion by 2037, and we are not that far away. And it's looking like it's going to close around 7 billion this year alone. And we're in an interesting time because the current state of wealth management is this really delicate balance between tradition and innovation. And obviously, the adoption of tech is democratizing access to advice, but that human element still remains an important component. Over your career, how have you seen the wealth tech space change?
Wait, no one could see it, but I winced when you talked about democratizing. I don't think I can agree with that statement, and I wanted to.
Let's debate.
Yeah, you don't have that many, if you look in aggregate, you don't have that many advisors that are pursuing the mass-affluent market where it's most needed. Best, you see some younger advisors pursuing Henrys and some firms starting a part of their practice to pursue them. But as a society, we continue to leave the bulk of our society behind. Think about this. The largest capitalist society that is also a representative democracy, for now anyway, with capitalism at its core, as the engine running everything, you'd be hard-pressed to find more than a few dozen schools or districts nationwide that provide or require any personal finance training. Credit card debt remains a huge problem for graduating college students, and that's for generations now. That goes back, I'm a Gen Xer, and it was a huge problem for my generation. And who's still flourishing? The credit card companies. So I have to say, I was the biggest naysayer when the generative AI rollout began, and while there remains far too much hype around Gen AI and AI in general, and there's far too much money available to pursue either what I call stupid ideas or copying ideas of others. And hey, by the way, AI for comms vendors, all right, you're now at your limit. Enough. You don't need any more notes vendors. We don't need any more notes vendors raising money. We got plenty. They can be bought up, spread around. 2 or 3 can stay on their own. But that said, I think AI is going to be one of those things. And I was the biggest naysayer when we first started this. It's really been, about 2 years ago, we started hearing about generative AI. Been covering Other forms of AI, people forget that machine learning's been around, gosh, 15 years in a sense where we understand it as machine learning, natural language processing too, advanced analytics, algorithms, that's all been around. It was this generative AI craze where you could ask a question of something that's really in essence an algorithm and get a response back that is in text. I think that kind of is going to be a bridge that we have finally needed to bring up on par this whole notion of people being able to serve that market. And I think that's also what ultimately spurred advisors to start serving the mass affluent in the end.
Absolutely. I want to go back to a point you made around the democratization of advice, because one trend that I'm following closely are the millennial and Gen Z expectations that are crushing down on advisors now, especially because I fall into that category. And over the years, I've literally been turned away by advisors who weren't taking on clients like myself. Heck, I'm a dink. Like, I'm the perfect demographic for that. And then when I did try to work with an advisor, my goals just got thrown into a Monte Carlo simulation and I just checked out of the conversation. So, needless to say, that relationship didn't necessarily go too well. So, to all those advisors that are listening, I'm in the market and I do care about things like digital accessibility and convenience. So, with the hopes of tech democratizing this access, are you seeing at least a mindset shift to cater to younger folks who are just starting to build wealth, or is it still that status quo?
No, I don't. Not in our human side of the industry. I think, yes, it's been my greatest disappointment over the last 20 years that I've been covering this, that we haven't seen that mind shift. And mind shift is the perfect way to put it. We need an industry mind shift, a societal mind shift. But I think it really goes back to the root of why we do this. And all too frequently, it's money. The advisors, yes, the fiduciary advisors do want the best for their clients, but they're still going after only the high net worth and the ultra high net worth. And study after study, I got to see this from multiple points of view. I drank the Kool-Aid to go over to Wealthfront for 2 years. But before that, I got recruited to go to Wealthfront because I had met John Stein, the founder of Betterment, at Investment News offices, gosh, 15 years ago when they launched. And he came into the office several times after that, and I started writing about it. And I thought it was absolutely insane. The word robo-advisor was insane. For me, it was this idea of providing access where there was no access. And still, that's what they mostly do today. And yeah, I think they are still probably the best option for folks just starting out in their careers to build what starts out as a small portfolio based on passive assets that are just going to grow without the need for a whole lot of hand-holding on the part of the young professional. But the only hope, it's going to sound funny to say it, but my only hope, Obi-Wan, is like Steve Chen over at Bolden. I don't know how many advisors know Stephen Chen. I know a lot of the technology folks know Stephen.
On our
Bolden,
10 to watch for those
yes.
that want to know.
I wrote it. Yes. He's in our 10 to watch, and I've known him for years. And what he built was called New Retirement until recently when they changed the name. And it's a take on the word bold, being bold and doing this. And really, you do have to be bold. You have to be bold and patient. And it's a long story. You can read the story to get the full background on it. But basically, if you can't find a good hourly planner or an advisor that wants to take you on because you don't have $1 million sitting there in investable assets, and you're willing to invest the time, you can build a financial plan and then look at a long-term retirement plan using Bolden yourself. But it does take a lot of time to set that up and do it. And you have to have the mindset and the wherewithal to do it. I think, though, AI is going to be some sort of bridge. I don't myself have a great view of what that's going to look like, but I really think it's going to allow young advisors who are either solo practitioners or in a small team to be a force multiplier, to take off a lot of the admin burden that eats up a lot of their time, a lot of the prospect. And that's another area where I see AI as a huge force multiplier, is in the prospecting and lead generation, the prospect building part of this. You've got Catchlight, you've got AI Identified, you've got Finny AI, a wealth of others out there now that I think some number of them are going to make it and they're going to help in that. And so all those things added together, I think there is the possibility that could open it up and make it financially worthwhile. And I give Kitsy's credit for this too, that when he started XYPN, he started to generate to bring in the data to see how long it took young advisors to become profitable. And if they were hanging out their own shingle, average was 3 years. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but who wants to go to school, probably take on debt, only to come out and live 2, 3 years without really an income. Are you married? Is your spouse going to help take care of you? It's something has to be done. The socialist side of myself thinks that all the highly profitable institutional financial services players, they need to create a pot that's going to help subsidize those young advisors coming out of school for those first 2 years, because no one's going to want to do that without at least being able to break even to pay your rent and do all that sort of thing. So I think something between industry and what AI is going to supply in terms of building efficiencies and allowing young advisors to take on more clients efficiently and be able to make a living, those two things are going to have to meet in the middle to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Along
Long
negative,
road to there.
the industry just does not. Again and again, the surveys show they're all after the same high net worth, ultra high net worth client, trying to steal them away from each other. They're not investing in the next generations. The closest I think we come is with the estate planning side. If they can establish a link in getting the next generation to stay with the firm, that's another bridge to it.
But to be all determined, like I said, I'm in the market. I'm the perfect demographic for these
Yeah,
advisors. Why do I have such a gosh darn hard
I,
time?
I wrote a column on this, and I don't want to name her to embarrass her, but a tech provider who also happens to be an advisor read the column, and she actually sent me a note saying she would be my advisor years ago, but I did not want to take her up on that as a charity case, but that's what it would take.
So let's go back to talking about kind of the state of tech, because as you mentioned, the Kitsy's map has exploded. There's AI maps now. There's maps for everything. There's a bajillion different vendors. So I want to talk about the state of the shiny object syndrome, because again, with all those maps, it's incredibly overwhelming. And just because there's an abundance of solutions doesn't mean you need them all. So where do you think advisors should prioritize their tech investments for this year and beyond?
It's hard for me to give you a blanket statement on that, to think about that for just a second.
I want the Davis statement on that, not the blanket one.
It's hard for me to make a blanket assessment, but I would suggest that every advisor firm needs to pick a tech adept professional or form a small committee, continually asking questions about the tech stack that they already have. If you're a firm that's already made a significant investment in the stack that you've got, you should look at where efficiency improvements could be made. Every vendor out there, especially the all-in-one platforms or multi-use platforms, they're constantly at work on workflow improvement. Years and years of surveys have shown that firms that invest in improving, streamlining, and making consistent their workflows and processes see big efficiency gains. But that takes discipline. And I've talked to a lot of advisors, especially when some of the first CRM systems started to roll out workflow improvements, like, I won't name names, Juncture is one I can remember. It took effort. That's what I repeatedly heard. It's getting easier now because there's so much in the way of, if not AI, then prompts and alerts that the analytics engines behind those can set. It takes making it the responsibility of someone on your team to put that responsibility in someone's wheelhouse to make that possible. And then if you have something like Salesforce, you got all the apps now that are available for Salesforce. They've got plugins that can do an awful lot in terms of these workflows and other productivity improvement areas. And then for advisors, comms and marketing, I made fun of it earlier, but that's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to AI these days. The same goes for prospecting and lead gen. We finally reached glasnost with these particular areas that the hype has been around for so long around prospecting and lead gen, but now you've got some solutions like AI Identified, Finny AI, Catchlight, WealthFeed, and there's several others that I haven't really covered closely that all look to do much the same thing. They're able to bring in an awful lot of data about your clients, about you, mesh it together, find points of contact, points of where your interests align, or where within a firm, advisor A over here aligns with client C over here, and that may be a good fit. Those are areas where I think you can go beyond the shiny new object and really look at where your firm could most benefit from improvements and what improvements are available that you can make a quick investment in, versus no one wants to rip and replace an entire all-in-one platform. It's better, especially if you have multi-year investments in that platform, look at what you can do to increase efficiency until it's too painful not to, and then look at what's out there to replace it with.
All right, so let's dig into this concept of the all-in-one platform, because that's another trend that I've been following. We've seen the continuous rise of them, which, look, advisors can certainly benefit from having everything integrated in one place. but show me a platform that can do everything world class. It's nearly impossible to maintain expertise at, say, 12 different functions. So, what are you seeing here? Are you thinking it's maybe going to be more disruption from small agile firms, maybe the industry giants trying to stay ahead of the curve? What are your thoughts here?
In a day-to-day sense, actually, I see both things going on. There's continued consolidation in the industry and a lot of churn. For example, I've written stories over the last few months about several, and colleagues of mine have written examples of senior executives at Envestnet that have jumped over and are now working at Orion. That's the biggest example of churn in terms of employees, but also acquisitions. Orion is another prime example. You've known Reed Colley for years. I've known Reed Colley since he started his last endeavor, which most everyone knows about. But his firm, Summit Wealth, was acquired by Orion recently. I had a bit of a confrontational interview with he and Natalie Wolfson when they announced that, because I had been hearing through the grapevine that I was impressed with his platform. I was impressed with what he built. It was a very young tech stack. It was very malleable in terms of what you could do with it, but he was facing that challenging headwind of client acquisition. And very much like what I just said, that most firms, they don't want to rip and replace sort of their core platform, especially if it's an all-in-one, to replace it with something else. And so I think that's going to be, for these new players that are coming in, that is the single biggest hurdle. Even if the tech is great, client acquisition is a very difficult thing, especially when it's a whole firm and its advisors with serious investment. But even there's success stories like Advison. They've been around for a good while now, but they were a startup all-in-one firm. They continue to add all kinds of bells and whistles. They made a few acquisitions. There's firms like UX Wealth. I've gotten to know Kyle Wiggs and his CTO, Carlos Simoyes. Sorry, Carlos, if I'm mispronouncing your name, but they're super bright guys. They built this from the ground up. Carlos comes from a background of Circle Black, where he helped build that platform. And they've worked with advisors, they know what advisors want, and they seem to be having some success there. I think we're going to see a mix of both. But then there's point areas, which is what I have a lot of excitement around. Take insurance, for example. You got things like SimpliSure. You've got things like Modern Life that are making it easier for advisors. Like Modern Life works with hybrid advisors who are licensed to sell insurance, but helps them work with the clients. They sell several different types, not just term life insurance, but long-term care insurance, et cetera. So SimpliSure, on the other hand, it works with non-licensed advisors to do this. And so those are two areas. Insurance has been notoriously lacking for decades in investing in tech. And these are two relatively new firms building out a whole platform that's going to help potentially the whole advisor industry. And there's several others. I'm blanking on names right now. That's an area. You got areas, advisors always talking about wanting to work with, you got firms like Capitalize with a Z and no E at the end, and Riser, which is RISR. They both, in their own way, help advisors come up with valuations for business owners, help them find holes maybe in their business plan on things like if they were considering to do a sale of their business, what do we not have or what have we not invested in that will help the price for when we want to sell our business. That's a whole new solution that advisors didn't have any kind of technology support for back when I started almost 20 years ago. Careful is another one I love to come back to. Careful is an app for creating like a circle of trust with aging parents. So the kids of the parents could take this on and enlist the advisor to help look for fraudulent charges, or at least just review. You don't have access to go in and make purchases or anything with the information. It's read only, but it helps keep a lookout. Those are all areas where there's an awful lot coming that advisors can make use of to both add services for their clients, but also make their businesses more efficient.
It's interesting that you call out insurance, because one of my hopes for 2025 and beyond is that we continue to see this convergence of industries: healthcare, insurance, wealth management. Wouldn't it be nice, say, if you're buying a house or looking on Zillow and boom, your mortgage is just all sorted out on the website? Healthcare, education, retirement, every life event will have financial services baked into the experience. So, any predictions on where you'd like to see the puck headed there?
Oh, Shannon, let me tell you, I'm putting my old hat on now. Now, this is Dave. This isn't bright-eyed Davis from 20 years ago. This is a 56-year-old Davis who actually has, let's see, 4 different doctors now: kidney doctor, high blood pressure doctor, diabetes doctor, and a GP.
You
They
don't
all,
look a day over 49, so.
oh, thank you very much. I say all that to say, I, like you, was very hopeful early on in my career that this would be solved by now, that we could have our little briefcase with all our a virtual little briefcase or key fob with all our data on it. And when I went from one doctor to see one of those other four doctors, take that information all with me. Whatever reason it is, the insurance companies don't want to share data or HIPAA regulations, you can't do that. I just went to a new doctor the other day and they're not in the same group and they couldn't share the data. I was going to have to fill out a whole bunch of either paper forms or online documents. And this is something absolutely not new to advisors. It's the same thing. Um, I would hope that's the case. I wish it was the case. There are certain silos, like I think Zillow, for instance. I think there's some publicly accessible data that's going to be easy to do. And things like Zillow and some of the other real estate apps, those are things that are, some of that data is accessible for things like Finney and a identified catchlight. They can access some of that data. Your health data, that's a whole different issue. Breaking down silos, I think some of the big banks are getting good at that. And that is one hope I have for Elon and his pal that are going to start this whole new agency around efficiency and government. Now, if they could poke holes that are secure holes to allow that kind of thing, that would be the ideal. Am I hopeful that your hope would come to life? I wish I could say I was, but I think it's going to be years. And it's going to take politics and regulatory are the biggest hurdles. I don't think it's not the data or the technology itself. It's the laws. The laws we have are a little too rigid to allow for that.
I would have to agree. That was just my ambitious, hopeful prediction. But I'm going for a hard pivot on this next trend and topic because I think it often gets overlooked or isn't really getting enough attention. But correct me if I'm wrong. But it's really the relationship between asset managers and financial advisors. It's changed. And those product pushing models have quickly become more holistic. So when it comes to things like enhanced fund performance, streamlining operations, improving communication with advisors, are asset managers headed in the right direction? And what do you think they'll have to focus on to compete moving forward?
It's hard for me to we don't follow the wealth managers at the same level of depth because it is in many ways a separate industry from the advisor space. I do get windows into that because I get an awful lot of press releases and I talk to an awful lot of people and I talk to people on the asset management side. I think it is fundamentally undergoing a revolution in and of itself. I think a lot of the same trends we've just been talking about are filtering in there. So I think what we're going to see first across the asset management world is these efficiencies built in. A lot of the same things. Some of these earliest agentic, I think I'm pronouncing that the way that the tech nerds would pronounce it, agentic AI, whereby you're basically programming an algorithm to start thinking, and this is totally overly simplified. It's not like a clone of you that would think just like you do, but you are able to program into an agent some means of decision making that reflects the way you would make choices on certain things. Like, I want to see this kind of data. I want to see it updated on this over this period of time. That yada yada. And you can get increasingly deep with that. I think that is going to allow advisory firms better access to research, for instance, research that they may have had to pay a lot more for in the past, whether that's being preferred by the asset managers themselves, which already produce an awful lot of research that advisors ingest, or it's partnerships within the asset management world, working some of the big tech providers. Envestnet has a huge example of that. They partnered with, let's see, was it Franklin Templeton, about 4 different major State Street, Franklin Templeton, blanking on some of the others, but about 4 major asset managers, BlackRock is another one, to help build out models that advisors could use. And it was collaborative effort on their behalf. I think that's a technology investment, whether it's how much AI is involved in creating those, I don't know. But in terms of those partnerships where AI is certainly helping or analytics is helping do things that weren't done before, it's going to make that whole process more efficient. So I think we may get to see more choice, certainly when it comes to SMAs be proliferating throughout and in different forms and who provides it to the advisor shop. That is going to have some form of sea change because it's going to allow them to offer more services, whether it's different derivatives of tax loss harvesting, different derivatives of direct indexing. Those services are going to be made much easier to operate and manage downstream thanks to technology. Much more nimble than it was just a few years ago. And that's the firms like Robo Advisors, my old friend Iraklis, folks like that are brilliant enough to build something. He and a few people are able to build it. That is something that we didn't see a decade before. It really took the asset managers themselves recruiting a whole team to build things like that. That is another change that I can't really foresee. How many folks like him are out there that can basically build their own direct indexing solution that could be sold to other firms? So yeah, it's murky, but I see it accelerating in a lot of different ways.
All right, so that's a good thing. We've covered a lot of ground here in our first segment between where the puck's headed, AI, shiny object syndrome, all-in-one platforms, millennial and Gen Z expectations, asset managers. So it's now time for segment 2 of this episode, where I put you in the hot seat, called Ask Us Anything. And I have turned to the social universe to field some questions, and we had a few folks slide into the DMs. And I have some good questions for you. So if you're ready for the hot seat,
No,
I
I'm
love
probably not. Let me take another long pull on my coffee here.
I do love the first question we got. I thought this was brilliant. Where do firms waste the most time when it comes to tech? What are some solutions to help them increase the value of the time they spend on tech? We should totally add this to the WealthStack study.
We should. The obvious one is one we've come back to that we made fun of, and that is there's really little, unless you just love to write and you love to write client communications, there's really no reason for you to be taking your own client notes, to be writing your own correspondence to clients. And most of these are standalone right now that you could sign up with one. I don't think most of them even require an annual subscription. I think several of them you can do it month to month until you're sure, and then start trying them out. Or if you're a solo practitioner, that's an investment of time. But if you are in a multi-advisor shop, have someone make that part of their responsibility, especially some young advisors, and see which ones work best with the tech stack you have, whether it's you're probably going to need it to work well with your CRM. So find one that's very compatible with Salesforce, if that's what you use, or Wealthbox, or Redtail. And Redtail itself has this built into it with its own engine. To me, is the low-hanging fruit. That is the most obvious sign of where many advisors are probably wasting their time, is that. And then second to that would be, man, oh man, what we have seen again and again in our own survey, and then many industry surveys, is advisors spend way too much time trying to get referrals from clients. And that's still the preferred, the most advantageous, best ROI is getting referrals from your clients now. Invest in some of these new apps, any AI, Identify, Catchlight. If you have warm leads, but you just don't have time to make those hot leads and then land the client, and use Catchlight to help. That's their forte, not starting out finding them, but warm leads to feed into it. That to me would be the second place to start investing in that, and let the tech work for you there.
Yes, I would have to agree with that. And then we had another question. This is a fun one. So, looking back 5 years, what is the biggest surprise? And looking forward 5 years, what will the Kitsy's Advisor Tech Map look like in 2030?
What's the biggest surprise in the last 5 years?
Yep.
That's one we've already talked about, which is AI.
Yep.
And I got yelled at in meetings, and we have a morning meeting talking about story ideas. And when the first generative AI stuff started to pop up, I saw it like many other trends. A perfect example is prospecting and lead gen. I've been bamboozled in years past, I admit it, using all kinds of different technology that was going to be the key to running it all, and it just didn't pan out. So the biggest surprise over the last 5 years has been the acceleration we have seen with what generative AI is allowing all different types of technology to do, building efficiency. And then let's see, what's the Kitsy's, Michael? I love that they call it the Kitsy's map. Well, it really is. There's going to have to be some kind of our friends over at Asset Map are going to have to give us a special technology to read the Kitsy's map in the years to come. It's going to have to pop out of something to see it. That or it's going to be multi-page because it's gotten out of hand.
That or we need to see some consolidation, like you said.
Yeah, and we just need one really bad down market, which I'm not wishing for.
Let's not put that into the
That would
universe.
happen, but yeah, and it's telling for me. I think last time I counted the years to 17 years ago that I started covering advisor tech. When I first started covering it, there were literally just a couple, 3, 4 dozen firms that were either directly in the advisor market or there were several CRMs from other industries that could be used there and they would be technically considered. And I could literally go around. I could just get on the phone and within a few weeks have covered the entire market. That's just no longer feasible because you've got 300 or so
No,
companies.
we'd have to clone you multiple times.
Well, clone anybody. And we're going to have to rely just to keep track of all the press releases all those 300 or so firms are pushing out on whatever it is that they're rolling out to keep up with that. It's going to require AI. And so, yeah, it heartens me greatly to see that this industry is matured in a way that it can support that level of ecosystem. You think about all the jobs that represents too. 17 years ago, that was really several dozen firms with probably anywhere from a few hundred, few thousand at the biggest shops. When you look at this little niche areas, a handful to a dozen maybe employees, and you think about that, multiply that in any way by 300, and it's grown. The tech side of this industry has grown a great deal.
Yes, it has. Hey, I wouldn't have a job if that weren't the case. So I'm certainly appreciative of it.
You and me both.
As always, I do appreciate you being put on the spot and your always insightful answers. But we have come to our final and my favorite segment that you know very well, Stack It or Whack It. I know you have the t-shirt to prove it, where I throw out a few technologies, not always WealthTech related, especially if I know you. Sometimes there's just random thoughts I have. And you tell me if they are worth the hype or not, aka Stack It or Whack It. And being my kayak loving, paddleboarding friend, I have to ask, stack or whack cadence sensors, which is basically a sensor that provides real-time stroke rate feedback if you are hardcore into that hobby.
Oh, Stack It.
Do you use that now?
Oh, I don't use it because I have different reasons for being out there, which is to relax and look around at my surroundings. And every once in a while, I'll go fast. But no, I have a lot of friends that are competitive racers now, folks that actually started paddling with me as novices that now, as fun, travel around the country competing in races. So no, it's great. And see the apps that finally they started out with just covering running, for instance, that now cover paddle sports. It's great. Another area where technology is finally catching up.
All right. Love it. One stack. All right. That was my random thought one. I'll ask you a WealthTech related one. And I've asked this one before because I'm always curious. I've gotten varying answers on it. Stack or whack AI stock picking in its current state, I should say. Caveat.
I would have to say Whack It more because I don't follow it. My IRA is with WealthStack, Wealthfront, and I don't have to think about it on a daily basis. Maybe I should say Stack It actually because I'm a space nut and I inherited just a little bit of money, just enough that I thought I will invest. And one was in a space SPAC and it went belly up within a few months and I continued to laugh at me. And the other one was Rocket Lab, and it's doing very well now. So maybe a stock picking app would have done better at helping me pick those.
All right. So a bit of a hybrid answer. I can appreciate that in the context. So thank you.
Sorry.
Davis, it is just always a blast getting to speak with you. Just quickly tell listeners where they can find out more about you and what you're working on at WealthManagement. Any interesting stories coming up?
AI continues to eat up an awful lot of my time, and it's exciting. Yeah, the irony of it. But that's what I get excited about is seeing new stuff that comes around. I don't need more of that in my inbox, but other areas that are interesting, I love it. I think the industry needs it. It's only going to help the industry.
Awesome. Thank you again for your time. And be sure to like and subscribe to the WealthStack podcast on all major podcasting platforms and follow all things WealthStack on wealthmanagement.com, LinkedIn, and X. And if you want the in-person WealthStack experience with me and Davis, join us June 10th through the 12th at the Boca Raton Resort in Florida for Wealth Management Edge. And thank you all for tuning in.